Have you ever sat in that heavy silence at a family dinner? Here on Bonds and Stories, we retell those moments honest every day, sometimes controversial. Every story is a mirror. Subscribe, join the conversation, and maybe find a little healing. My name is Claire Rowan. I'm 34, and the first line in the story of my company doesn't start with a seed round or a slick pitch deck. It starts with dirt under my nails on a schoolyard in Tacoma, a rain-dark afternoon, and my brother Ethan stepping between me and 3 girls who thought my thrift store jacket made me fair game. Back then, Ethan was 4 years older, all elbows and scraped knees, the sort of kid who sprinted everywhere without asking why. I was the quiet one who memorized bus schedules and library due dates. On that afternoon, one of the girls had grabbed my backpack and ground it into a puddle until the canvas bled brown water. They laughed. I cried the way second graders cry, hiccuping, ashamed of the sound of it. Ethan crossed the blacktop like a weather front. He didn't shove anyone. He didn't have to. He just looked at those girls and said, "Not her." They broke apart, mumbling, suddenly busy with their own shoelaces. He helped me rinse the mud out at a drinking fountain, then hung the bag on the heater vent at home so Mom wouldn't see the worst of it. If you opened our front door that year, you'd smell damp wool and lemon dish soap, and you'd hear the faint tectonics of our parents' marriage grinding under the surface of everything. Dad started sleeping on the couch sometimes, and Mom overcooked the pasta because she forgot the timer. When I turned 14, the pretending stopped. Dad took his toolbox and left a note on the counter that read, "Like a grocery list, rent due, dog food, call the district office." Mom didn't cry in front of us, but her face took on that late winter gray. Ethan was 18, and suddenly older than his age. He learned how to make meatloaf from a recipe card, signed permission slips, and drove me to school in his car that smelled like pine air freshener and wet sneakers. At night, we lay on the roof outside his window, counting planes, and telling each other that our family wasn't the kind that disappeared. We just needed a new map. I found mine in the computer lab, where the keys had shiny hollows from use. Code made sense the way constellations do once someone traces the lines for you. Ethan had offers from universities to play basketball, but he turned down the long drives and the dorms so he could stay home, take classes at the community college, and keep the bills from tipping over. "We'll make something that has both our names on it," he told me one night, pointing at the sky the way you point at a brochure for a place you swear you'll visit. 2 years later, an envelope with a Berkeley return address dropped through the mail slot. Full ride. I showed Ethan first. He lifted me off my feet with a noise I'd only ever heard from him after a winning shot. He helped me pack my one good suitcase and left a paper crane in the front pocket as a joke about luck. At school, my days were algorithms and group projects, the city at the edge of the bay glittering like a promise. Every Sunday, Ethan called. He had switched from community college to a state university across town, working days at a small outdoor gear company where he wrote copy about tents and learned the alphabet of marketing. "We're still co-founders in training," he'd say. "You me something with our initials on the letterhead." In my junior year, Ethan met Mallerie Keene. I first saw her as a thumbnail on my laptop, honey light hair, a cardigan that matched her lipstick, a laugh that arrived half a second before her smile. She was in his marketing analytics class, he told me. She'd been raised on the other side of town and didn't like camping, but loved the smell of new books. On the call, she leaned into the frame and said, "Hi, Claire," as if we were already exchanging holiday recipes. I wanted to like her for making his eyes brighter. I told myself it was only newness that made me feel as if the window between my brother and me had shifted an inch to the left. When I flew home for spring break, the airport air tasted like coffee and jet fuel, and Tacoma felt both smaller and dearer than I remembered. Ethan brought Mallerie to dinner at Marta's, the place with cracked red vinyl booths and a mural of Mount Rainier that someone had tried to make look like a postcard. She hugged me with both arms and called me sis in a way that should have felt warm. While the server filled our water glasses, she kept her palm anchored to Ethan's forearm. When he and I returned to a private joke about our high school cafeteria mystery casserole, a line appeared at the corner of her mouth, a seam closing. She asked questions that slid across the surface of things, what dorm I lived in, whether I liked indoor plants, and then over dessert, she tilted her head and said, "Ethan told me you two once talked about starting a company together. That's adorable." People change their minds when they grow up, though, don't they? She smiled when she said it. I smiled back because I had not yet learned that some smiles are fences. After graduation, I moved home instead of to one of the offers waiting in San Francisco or New York. I rented a narrow office over a florist downtown. The room smelled like damp carpet and eucalyptus from below. On the window, I taped a sheet of printer paper where a logo should have been and wrote North Star in Sharpie because every idea needs a placeholder. I wrote code until my wrists ached and worked the espresso machine at the corner cafe mornings to keep the lights on. Ethan stopped by that first week with a houseplant in a chipped blue pot. "Something alive for your desk," he said, grinning. He studied my whiteboard with the sort of focus he used to reserve for scouting reports. When I told him I wanted him to join as head of growth once I had a few months of runway, he lit up the way he had when the Berkeley envelope arrived, when he told Mallerie the weather changed. It wasn't immediate, it rarely is. It was more like a barometer falling. Our weekly sibling dinners became monthly brunches that Mallerie scheduled with the efficiency of a project manager. She had opinions about my company that were less questions than conclusions delivered in a gentle tone. Wasn't my concept something the big platforms were already doing? Wasn't it risky to turn down real jobs in a market like this? Wasn't the product too complicated for regular folks? Wasn't it better for Ethan's resume to show stability? She framed it as care. I recognized dimly that it was containment. When Ethan and Mallerie announced their engagement, my mother bought a calendar and wrote the wedding date on every month leading up to it, as if repetition could ward off disaster. Ethan proposed on a lookout above the Sound, he told me later, with a ring that looked suspiciously like the one I'd pointed out at a jewelry store window when we were teenagers. I wanted to believe that meant something like continuity. Mallerie asked me to be her maid of honor over cinnamon rolls at her favorite bakery. "No one matters more to Ethan than you," she said. And for a beat, I almost believed that was a bridge she was offering. I said yes, because he was looking at me with that last day of school grin from our childhood, and because sometimes we accept the role we're given and try to make it generous from the inside. The months that followed were a choreography of mismatched expectations. The bridesmaid dress Mallerie chose for me was a pale shade that made me look like milk, left out too long, with a neckline that hit at exactly the wrong place. When I suggested a small change the seamstress could make in 10 minutes, Mallerie laughed softly and said, "Let's trust the designer." She scheduled a cake tasting the same morning I'd blocked for a crucial investor meeting. When I couldn't be at both, she told Ethan I wasn't leaning into the spirit of family. At a brunch 2 months before the wedding, she set down her phone after scrolling and said, "I know you and Ethan have your history. It might be healthy to remember he has to build our life now." I nodded because the room was full of her friends, and because no one had ever taught me how to argue about invisible lines without looking like the one drawing them. Meanwhile, North Star stopped being only a dream. A local angel investor named Raphael visited my office because his florist downstairs told him I had nice manners. He read my deck while the scent of lilies drifted up and offered a small check that felt like oxygen. A business paper ran a column about startups to watch, and they put my face next to a paragraph that used words like promising and hometown. Ethan called to say he was proud. At my mother's birthday dinner that weekend, Mallerie raised her glass and said it was sweet. I was getting a little pressed the way you talk about a niece's school play. Later, while Mom and Ethan fetched coffee from the kitchen, Mallerie leaned across the table and said, "Don't let attention go to your head. It's easy to forget where you come from when people clap." The next week, a cousin texted to ask whether I'd really told people I was too good for Tacoma now. I hadn't. I didn't even know how to sound like that. I tried to reset. I bought a notebook and wrote down what mattered. Love my brother, build my product. Tell the truth even when it made me sound difficult. The rehearsal dinner was supposed to be the easy part, eat toast, smile. It took place at a restaurant on Ruston Way with white tablecloths and a view so glossy it could have been laminated. I came straight from a contract signing with a regional retailer that would keep my company breathing for at least a year. The adrenaline of it made me feel a little untethered, like I'd stood up too fast. When I arrived, the host directed me to a table far from the head of the room where Ethan and Mallerie sat with their parents. I told myself it was about seating charts, not symbolism. I waited for a beat when the conversation thinned, then leaned forward to catch Ethan's eye. Guess what I said soft enough not to interrupt anyone else? They signed. He grinned with that old, unguarded joy. Before he could ask questions, Mallerie touched his wrist and said, "Should we check on the photographer?" "The light's tricky here." He half rose, already reaching for his phone. Mallerie turned to me with a smile that showed no teeth. "That's great about your project," she said. "Hobbies keep us human." The word hobby lodged between my ribs. I excused myself and headed for the restroom, steadying my expression in the reflection of the hallway's framed black and white photographs of the waterfront 30 years ago. The ladies' room door swung an inch, and a voice slid through the crack bright with laughter. It was Mallerie talking to two bridesmaids whose names I'd rehearsed and forgotten. She times these little announcements, Mallerie said, like she's dropping product updates at a keynote. It's almost endearing if it weren't so desperate. One of the women made a sympathetic noise. Mallerie went on new, money thrift shop polish. The shoe's last season's leftovers. Ethan feels obligated because of their childhood. She'll grow out of it when the hype dies down. The room smelled like citrus soap. I stood with my hand on the door and thought about being 8, about the sound of muddy water in a backpack, and my brother's voice saying, "Not her." I didn't step inside. I turned back down the hall and walked onto the patio where the glass made the city look like a planet observed through a ship's window. I waited until Mallerie was alone at the dessert table, arranging petit four into neat geometry. "Can we talk a second?" I asked. She startled, then arranged her face into the version that always played well for parents and photographers. "Sure, Claire," she said. "What's up?" There are ways to say things that fold time in half. I told her I had heard what she said. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't use the words I wanted to. I said I wasn't in competition with her, that I loved my brother, that I wanted her to love him too, that the rest press contract shoes didn't belong on a scale. The pleasantness peeled off her expression like a sticker. "So you were eavesdropping," she said. "How convenient." I walked past the door, I answered. "You were speaking loudly, but that's not the point." She tilted her head, eyes bright as glass. "The point is, the night before my wedding, you needed to make sure everyone knew you landed a deal. Do you ever ask yourself why you need to be the headline in every room?" I told Ethan quietly, I said. I wasn't performing. She stepped closer, so close I could smell the vanilla of her lotion. "He doesn't need you anymore," she said, not whispering. "He has me. Your weekly sibling dinners, your inside language, your big sister energy from the little sister body, put it away. Some people don't know how to let go. It's unbecoming." Behind me, footsteps. The patio door side open, Ethan's voice. "What's going on?" Mallory's eyes went shiny in an instant, practice rain. She half turned to him and said, "I keep trying, E. I keep inviting her in. She says my family isn't good enough and I'm trying to take you away from her." It wasn't a precise inversion of the truth. It was a mirror tilted to make me look wrong. I said her name. I tried to explain. Ethan's face, always so easy to read, had become a room with the lights off. He said he'd noticed me skipping things, always too busy to help. I told him about invoices and payroll and a code sprint that had kept me awake 2 nights running. He said I brought every conversation back to myself. I told him he used to dream with me about letterhead with our initials. "That was before you decided you were better than everyone," he said low and quick, and there was a kind of satisfaction in it, as if finding that line gave him a handhold on the cliff. I don't know which word I said next. I remember the railing at my back, cool and unyielding. I remember his palm at my shoulder, more a hard guide than a hit enough pressure to move me an inch, and enough to lodge the moment where nervous systems keep their worst Polaroids. He said I shouldn't come to the wedding. Somewhere inside, a part of me that had learned to take notes even when my chest was on fire wrote the words down. No one stepped between us. People turn their faces, the polite angle people use when they want to witness without intervening. Mallory's tears made small silver highways down her cheekbones. For half a second, when Ethan turned toward the door with his arm around her, she looked back at me with a private expression, triumph without gloating, almost relief. I found my purse under my chair and walked out through the lobby where a host was lighting votives in small glass cups. My phone vibrated with nothing. In the car, the dark smelled like rain that hadn't arrived yet. I typed a text to Ethan and erased it, then typed it again. When you're ready to hear the truth, I'll be here. I love you. I press send and watch the message deliver with that small, stupid confidence that apps lend us that sending equals being heard. It didn't return a failure notice. It also didn't return anything else. When I woke the next morning, my eyes felt sanded. There was a group message from Mallerie to the bridesmaids' polite language about family matters and my regrettable inability to continue in my role. There were no question marks, no inquiries, just logistics adjusting around an absence as if it were a new piece of furniture. I showered, made coffee, opened my laptop, and began to work because I didn't know what else to do with my hands. That was the day North Star stopped being theoretical and started being the thing between me and the blankness. I wrote a list on a sticky note and stuck it to my monitor. Ship the feature, pay the contractor, fix the onboarding bug, answer. Raphael's email. I ate crackers at my desk and watched gulls pivot over the florist's awning. When I lay down that night, my body thought it was still seated at the keyboard. Somewhere around 3, I dreamed of a schoolyard, a muddy backpack, and a boy saying, "Not her." I woke before my alarm and stared at the ceiling until the room decided to be a room again. Ethan didn't reply to my text. Not that day, not that week, not that year. I kept a copy of The Paper Crane in my desk, tucked under a rubber band ball and a bag of almonds. Some days I forgot it was there. Some days I could feel its weight like something the size of a ship. Work steadied my hands when nothing else did. I moved through the first weeks after the rehearsal dinner, like someone crossing a river on winter stones, placing my feet carefully, not looking up. North Star became the map that kept me from walking in circles. I shipped a release that cut onboarding time and half-answered support tickets at midnight and learned exactly which vendor would net 30 without calling it a favor. News about the wedding arrived through other people's sentences. A cousin posted a photo of sparklers and white chairs. My mother left a voicemail describing the vows in a voice that rearranged itself after every third word. I didn't call Ethan, he didn't call me. It was not a truce, it was weather that wouldn't break. 3 months later, I emailed him anyway. "I miss you. Can we talk?" The reply came from Mallerie, signed with his address. "Please respect our boundary." She didn't threaten. She didn't shout. She wrote it as if she were closing a browser tab, so I turned the volume up on everything else. I hired a part-time engineer from the university job board and a bookkeeper who wore floral scarves and added polite notes to my invoices. Raphael introduced me to 2 owners of a regional retail chain. I demoed in a conference room that smelled like dry erase marker and stale coffee, and they signed a pilot that filled the office with a new kind of quiet relief. A local magazine put me in a column with 3 other founders in borrowed blazers. I bought a used couch from a dentist who was moving and told myself it was a real office now because there was a place to sit that wasn't a rolling chair. In the second year, I saw Ethan for the first time since the patio. Our grandfather died in early fall, the kind of death that lives in the obituaries as peaceful. At the cemetery, the grass kept catching my heel. Across the grave, Ethan stood next to Mallerie, one hand flat on her back, as if balancing her there. He looked like our father in certain angles, which felt unfair somehow, as if resemblance were a trick. When the service ended, I walked the long way around the chairs to face him. "I'm sorry," I said. He nodded eyes on the lowering straps, then guided Mallerie toward the car without a word. I spent the reception near the potato salad making small talk with a second cousin who remembered me as the quiet one who always had a book. That night, I cried in the shower with the water hot enough to blur the mirror and left a towel on the floor because I couldn't be neat about grief. Life has a way of lengthening. North Star grew from a florist top office into a floor of a building with a real lobby and elevators that hummed. I learned to sit at conference tables without apologizing for the chair I took. I hired Isla, a brilliant systems architect who read my code like a score and made the hard parts look inevitable. I hired Tony, an assistant who arranged my calendar with the calm of a chess player, and Shreya in partnerships who remembered everyone's birthdays. We launched in 3 more markets. A competitor tried to poach Isla and failed. My mother started sending me clippings with handwritten exclamation points in the margins. Success sorted my days, but didn't cure the low-pressure system sitting behind my ribs. On holidays, I cooked too much and let the leftovers go bad. When the public markets finally cared about companies like mine, I stood under lights hotter than they looked and said carefully rehearsed sentences about growth and margins and local merchants. Reporters called me disciplined. The stock symbol ticked like a tiny metronome in the corner of a television screen, while I ordered takeout and answered my own customer emails because it made the company feel like a person. From my mother, I learned small facts about Ethan, the way you learn the height of a tree by measuring its shadow. Lily was born then Noah. A downsizing at his firm stalled his promotion. They bought a house that was a little too big for their income and a little too far from town. When birthdays came, I mailed children's books with inscriptions about stars and maps. They keep them, my mother said once, as if that were a report card we both needed to see. On my 32nd birthday, a LinkedIn request landed in my inbox, Ethan's name, and a photo cropped too close. I accepted, waited an hour for a message that didn't arrive, then turned off the laptop and went for a run until my lungs argued with my legs, and both gave up at the same moment. The next morning, I still didn't write to him. 2 winters later, the walls of Tacoma felt closer than they used to. Not because the city had shrunk, but because my life had outgrown its careful slots. I moved the company's headquarters to California, where clients could wake me with their sunrise, and I could finish my day before the industry did. I rented a house above the water that was all angles and glass, not because I needed the square footage, but because the horizon steadied me. At night, the ocean was a slow animal breathing under the cliff. If I'd let it, solitude might have learned to bark. It didn't. It softened at the edges because I was not in truth alone. Raphael and his wife hosted Sunday suppers where the table grew longer when one more chair was needed. Ela knew when to call a meeting and when to stop by with soup. Tony said things like, "You're not a machine." Claire, and scheduled breaks, I pretended to resent. I began seeing Dr. Shu, a therapist whose office had a rug patterned like waves and a window with a view of eucalyptus. She didn't use words like closure. She asked where I felt anger in my body and what happened if I breathed around it instead of through it. Sometimes the past arrived anyway. I ran into Mallerie once at a hotel lobby in San Diego, a conference weekend when everyone wore name badges and practiced sincerity. We looked at each other the way people do when they share a chapter and not a book. She said Claire like a place she'd visited. I said Mallerie like a date on a calendar. Neither of us asked about Ethan. We didn't need to. The conversation lasted 3 sentences, then dissolved back into the murmur of other people's ambitions. Work filled the spaces that would have been family, and the company learned to walk without looking down. We opened a second office near Santa Monica. I bought a bicycle with a bell that sounded like a polite apology. I learned the names of surfers I never met because Tony followed their schedules to avoid traffic. On weekday mornings, I swam laps in a cold pool until my muscles remembered they belonged to me. On Sundays, I called my mother while she watered her porch plants, and we talked about the weather and how the neighbor's dog had started wearing sweaters. 12 years is not a clean number. It's birthdays. No one says out loud, postcards you don't send because the address might be wrong, a name you type and delete again. It's also a company that survives its first storms, and a home that stops echoing when friends come in without knocking. I woke early, swam, returned emails, fed the sourdough starter I kept forgetting to name, and watched the light move across the floor like a careful hand. That was life, the part that goes on after the scene that splits your timeline. It had shape and weight and small mercies, and it held. The morning the intercom buzzed, the ocean was slate green and patient. I had just come back from a swim hair damp under a towel email, open coffee, cooling beside the keyboard. Tony had color-coded the day into calls and a product review, and I was deciding whether to ignore the blinking light on my phone when the screen in my office woke itself and split into quadrants. Drive gate entry service walk. At the main gate, 3 figures and a fourth half hidden by a stack of luggage. The camera didn't flatter anyone. Ethan's shoulders rounded a day's beard, darkening his jaw. Mallerie, her hair brassy at the tips, in a way that looked like a plan that ran out of budget sunglasses on her head like punctuation. 2 kids between them, Lily long-limbed and wary, and Noah in a too-big hoodie heel scuffing the asphalt. My first thought was a breath that didn't finish. The second was automatic. I hit the audio button. "Can I help you?" Ethan looked up as if the gate itself had spoken. "Claire," he said the way you say a childhood street name you haven't walked in years. Mallory's smile arrived like a party favor. "Your place is gorgeous," she said to the camera. "We saw it in that profile. What was it, coastal modern?" "The glass really sings." Noah pressed his face to the bars, peering up the drive as if he might catch the house looking back. I didn't buzz them in. "Why are you here?" I asked. Ethan shifted the weight of the duffel in his hand, and I saw the movement land heavy across his shoulders. "We need to talk," he said. "Do you have a minute?" Minutes were all I had, and none of them felt like this. "I'll be right down," I said, and muted the feed before I could count the number of suitcases wedged into the trunk of their car. Walking the curve of the drive, I felt my body negotiate itself, jaw unclenching, hands open at my sides. The cypress threw long shadows. The keypad glowed. At the gate, the air held that salt and metal scent it gets before a storm, even when there isn't one. Up close, time had revised all of us. The kids were taller than the photos my mother had forwarded. Ethan's hairline had retreated a step. Mallory's foundation sat a shade warmer than her neck. None of it mattered, and all of it did. "You look well," Ethan said. "I swim," I answered, as if exercise were an alibi. "We drove all night," Mallory said brightly. "San Jose traffic is a disease." "But we made it. Isn't that what counts?" She looked past me at the house already measuring the windows. "What do you need?" I asked. Ethan exhaled, gaze fixed somewhere at my shoulder. "I lost my job," he said. 6 months ago. We tried to hang on." "The house?" He stopped, swallowed. "The bank took it. We've been with friends since." Mallory nodded, lips making the shape of sympathy for herself. "And then friends stopped being available," she said. "You know how it is. We thought California has better opportunities for marketing, right?" "We already?" She broke off to smile down at Noah. "We already looked at schools." Lily, who had been quiet, lifted her chin. "I got into band," she said, as if offering a credential. "At the one near here. They have a good program. Online said so." "You drove here to ask for a place to stay," I said. "We're family," Ethan offered, and the word sat there like an object we'd all dropped and found again at a different angle. My eyes flicked to the car, clothes in vacuum bags, a lamp wrapped in a towel whose edge hung loose, a box labeled Kitchen Keep. They had not come to ask, they had come to move. "I can't have you live here," I said. Mallory blinked as if I'd misread the cue. "Just for a little while," she said. "Until we're back on our feet." "A few weeks. Months, maybe. The kids need stability." "Stability isn't the same as this house," I said. "And this house isn't an answer to what went wrong." Ethan stepped closer to the bars, palm sliding across the metal, as if touch could persuade it. "Claire," he said softer. "I know we haven't." He stopped, searching for a noun that wouldn't collapse under its own weight. "Please." Noah tugged at his sleeve. "Dad, I have to pee," he announced, urgency trumping strategy. Lily elbowed him, horrified. "There's a cafe at the bottom of the hill," I said. "Tell them to use the back restroom." "They're nice." "Of course," Mallory said, with a tight cheerfulness, pushing the kids toward the sidewalk. "Field trip. We'll be right there, sweetie." She passed a tote through the bars to Ethan and shepherded the children down the slope, the shape of her irritation slipping over her like a cardigan. When we were momentarily alone, the air between us thinned. Ethan looked at me as if he were measuring the distance he'd have to cross and whether his legs still knew the motion. "We messed up," he said finally. "You pushed me against a railing and told me not to come to your wedding." I answered, "That's not a mess. That's an event." His mouth tightened. "I believed things I shouldn't have." "You believed exactly what you wanted to," I said, and the sentence didn't even taste like anger. It tasted like the mouthfeel of a fact. He nodded, and the nod wasn't agreement so much as consent to reality. "I don't know how to—" "I'm not a refuge you can enter without knocking," I said, "but I'm not a closed door either." Mallory returned, kids in tow. The crisis of the cafe restroom averted. Noah carried a paper cup of water like a prize. Lily had a napkin with a cookie folded inside it, as if she'd been permitted to choose one small sweetness and had made it count. So Mallory said briskly, now that everyone's comfortable, "Let's talk logistics. We can take the rooms on the east side of the house away from your work if privacy is the issue." "I'm very organized. You won't even know we're here." "It's not about square footage," I said. Her smile lost a gear. Everything is about space, honey. Not the kind of space I mean. Ethan shot her a look, and for a beat, something old and untrained flared there, the boy who once checked a bully without touching him. "Let me talk," he said. She lifted both hands, innocent. "I'm listening." I met his eyes. "Do you believe I told the truth that night?" I asked. Mallory's gaze sharpened. "That's ancient history," she said quickly, a hand reaching reflexively for his sleeve. "We were all young and dramatic. Now is about the kids. It's about the habit of lying and the habit of choosing not to see," I said. "Do you believe me, Ethan?" He stared down at his shoes, then back up, and I watched the algebra move across his face, the carry the one of pride and loss, and the simple arithmetic of what's left. "I don't know what to do with what I believe," he said, finally, voice rough. "That's an answer," I said. "It's not the one you think it is." Noah bravely kicked at a pebble until it rattled against the curb. Lily hugged the cookie napkin to her chest like a letter. I drew a breath that felt like the first one after a cold pool. "I'm not opening the gate," I said. "But I will pay for a furnished apartment for 6 months. A real place near the schools you've already researched. I'll introduce you to 3 people who are hiring. After that, you're on your own." Mallerie stared as if I'd offered a bowl of air. "We don't need charity," she snapped, and the gloss slid right off the word. "It's not charity," I said. "It's the only help I can give that won't erase me." Ethan's mouth moved around silence. "I don't know what to say." "Start with thank you," Lily said softly, not looking at either of them. Mallerie shot her a look that would have scorched paper. Then, as if reminded of the stage, she turned back to me with a tremble sewn onto her smile. "If there are strings, there are conditions," I said. "We're not pretending the past didn't happen. If I'm paying, we're going to sit in a room with a professional and learn how to speak without breaking things. You, me, Ethan. The kids, if and when someone trained says it makes sense." "You're dictating Mallorie began. "I'm setting my terms," I said. Ethan rubbed the back of his neck, a gesture older than jobs and mortgages. "That's fair," he said, and the word arrived unsteady but standing. Mallorie's chin lifted, defaulting to a height advantage she didn't have. "My children do not need therapy. They need adults who can tell the truth," I said. "The therapy is for us." Noah looked up at Lily. "What's therapy?" he whispered. "Like a coach," she whispered back, "for talking." He seemed to consider this, then nodded solemnly as if someone had explained the offside rule. The gate beeped faintly, a maintenance warning for a battery I'd ignored on purpose. Everything about this moment felt like standing in a doorway and measuring whether your shoulders would fit. "Tony will reach out by end of day," I said. "He'll handle the lease and the keys. You'll sign an agreement about the timeline and the condition. It's not a loan, it's a line we can both see." Mallorie's eyes narrowed. "A contract between family. It keeps misunderstandings small," I said. Ethan looked at the kids as if recalibrating his idea of family to include 2 people and a gate. "Okay," he said. "Okay." Lily's face brightened like a light coming on in a hallway. Noah took a careful step toward the bars, gripping them with both hands. "Are you really our aunt?" he asked. "The book aunt." "The book aunt," I said. "My favorite was the space one," he said, "with the girl who built a radio out of junk." Lily cried when the astronaut waved from the window. "I did not," she said automatically, cheeks pinking. "You absolutely did," he said, delighted to have a fact in his favor. Mallerie inhaled, about to direct the script again, but Ethan touched her arm and shook his head. She held his gaze, weighed some private calculus, and for once chose stillness. I didn't look at my watch. I didn't look at the cameras. I looked at the faces in front of me that I knew, and didn't know, and tried to speak only into the present tense. "If you need boxes moved from the car to the apartment," I said, "Tony can send someone. You can send measurements. We'll make sure the kids have beds they don't grow out of in a month." "Why are you doing this?" Mallorie asked. Not as a challenge, more as a study guide question for a test she'd believed had different answers. "Because I can," I said, "and because this is what I can live with." We stood there for a moment with the gulls carving white arcs over the road, and a delivery truck growling past, and the world went on doing its indifferent work. A breeze lifted the small hairs at my temple. Somewhere below, the cafe's doorbell dinged as someone left with a pastry in a paper bag. "Lunch," Lily said suddenly, as if there had been a plan we'd all forgotten. "Are we—" She cut herself off, uncertain of pronouns. "There's a place down the hill with plastic menus and a view," I said. "Good fries. If you want to go there today, text me. If you don't text me tomorrow." Mallorie's mouth flattened, but she didn't argue. Ethan nodded, eyes wet. In a way, he tried to blink into submission. "I'll have Tony text you in an hour," I said. "He'll need your email and your ID." "Okay," he said again. I reached for the keypad. The square buttons were warm from the sun. My finger hovered over lock, even though the gate was already closed. I pressed it anyway, the soft mechanical clunk more symbol than function, and everyone heard it. Not a slam, not a no. A boundary rendered in steel and electricity and decision. "Thank you," Lily said, and the word crossed the space without snagging on anything. I nodded. "See you soon," I said, and meant it in the smallest and largest ways a phrase can mean something without promising anything else. I turned and walked back up the curve, the towel slipping from my shoulders to my hand, the driveway's aggregate pressing its small moons into the soles of my sandals. At the bend, I glanced over my shoulder the way you do when you need one last image to fix the moment's geometry in your mind. Ethan stood with his hands on the suitcase handle, and his face unguarded, as if for a breath he'd stepped out from under the angles he'd been living inside. Mallerie looked at the kids, not at me. Lily watched a gull hover in place and laughed once, surprised by the mechanics of wind. Noah checked his pockets for the napkin-wrapped cookie, as if the future depended on not losing it. At the top, the house received me the way it always did, quietly, without drama holding its edges so I could hold mine. I closed the door behind me, not to shut anything out, but because that is what doors are for. I stood with my palm flat against the wood until my heart slowed, then let my hand fall and walked back to the desk where the email still waited. The coffee cooler. Now the cursor, a patient blink. The day moved the way days do, when the air has been shifted slightly brighter at the edges, slightly louder in the middle. Tony texted Ethan before lunch CCing me. By mid-afternoon, he'd secured a 3-bedroom place in a quiet building a mile inland, laminate floors, decent light. A small balcony with a view of rooftops and a slice of sky. I wired 6 months' rent and the deposit from the company account and had legal draft a short agreement. Date's expectations, the single condition about therapy put in writing without drama. At sunset, my phone rang. "We got the keys," Ethan said. His voice carried traffic and the hollow of empty rooms. "The kids are measuring where beds should go." He hesitated. "Thank you. You'll need school forms tomorrow," I said. "Tony loaded the PDFs into your email." From somewhere near the phone, Mallerie said, "We saw," in a tone that tried on politeness and kept it. Then lower to someone in the room. "Shoes off until we mop, please." A beat. The balcony door sticks. "I'll have maintenance look," I said, and almost smiled at the reflex. He cleared his throat. "About the condition." "The first appointment can be next week," I said. "Dr. Hashu has a colleague who does family work. We'll start there." "I told Mallerie," he said. "She doesn't like the word, but she said she'll go." "Tuesday at 5, I said. "I'll send the address." The line went quiet for a long second. Then okay. We met the next afternoon at a cafe near their building that sold sandwiches named after neighborhoods. Lily ordered the Belmont and ate it in neat squares. Noah asked for extra pickles and built a small fort with the toothpicks. Mallerie wore a white blouse and a careful smile. I kept my back to the door and the conversation to small things, locker combinations, a science teacher who kept hermit crabs in the classroom, a kid on the 3rd floor who loved drums. Therapy began in a room with soft chairs and a rug patterned with triangles. Dr. Ortega's silver hair, unhurried voice asked questions that made space rather than conclusions. Mallerie sat with precise posture, hands folded as if she might catch any stray mess before it touched her. Ethan slouched alert in that way people are when they're ready to run. I kept my feet flat on the floor so my body wouldn't float. The first session was mostly inventory. Dr. Ortega wanted dates, not adjectives. The second session asked for adjectives anyway. Jealous Mallerie said finally the word small and bright, as if she'd taken it out of foil. I was afraid I was the extra person in a room that already had 2. She stared at her knuckles. I made choices that were unkind. No one rushed to fill the air. Ethan said nothing for a long time, then I made it easy to be cruel, as if he'd found a tool and recognized its shape. Between sessions, life staged itself. The kids started school. I sent over 2 mattresses that didn't squeak and a lamp that threw gold onto book pages. Tony showed up with a toolkit and installed curtain rods. Isla forwarded 3 marketing openings. 2 were wrong, 1 stuck. Ethan interviewed found a rhythm talking to people who sold software to other people who didn't want to be sold anything. He shaved most mornings. The new apartment smelled like detergent and something fried from the neighbors. On a Saturday in late September, we met at a diner that leaned over the beach. Lily ran toward the windows and pressed her hands to the glass, tracking a pelican's slow arc. Noah lined up jelly packets by color. Mallerie checked the menu for salads, then ordered pancakes after a brief argument with herself. Ethan asked me about North Star, as if you could ask about a person. How's it sleeping? Does it eat? Does it laugh? I answered in clean lines. Product release hire, we'd made a client who finally paid on time. We managed to talk like people who had paused a conversation and were learning where it started again. The next therapy session was sharper. Dr. Ortega asked for the rehearsal dinner in present tense. I told it. Ethan listened with his jaw locked. Mallerie kept her eyes on the rug. When I got to the railing, Dr. Ortega lifted a hand. Pause there, she said. I wanted to fix something, he said. It felt like fixing would be moving someone. I moved the wrong person. Mallory's mouth opened shut. I wanted him to choose me, she said. I thought the choosing had to be proven. She exhaled, and the sound was older than language. It's ugly when you hear yourself say it. We didn't grant absolution. We scheduled another session. The apartment filled. Cardboard flattened in the hall. A doodle by the phone, Lily wrote band 3:05 p.m. 2 Saishar Thu. Don't forget reads in bubble letters. Noah taped a drawing to the fridge of a rocket labeled where, the number backward stars square as windows. When I dropped off a stack of paperbacks, Lily blinked back happy tears and said, We don't have to give these back, right? She chose one about a girl and a meteor shower and tucked it under her pillow. Noah tried to read upside down and got dizzy. Work didn't pause. North Star closed a partner deal in Phoenix. Tony blocked a week of my calendar by placing a fake board meeting on it, then replaced it with rest when I raised an eyebrow. I kept my promise to my own sessions with Dr. Shu and found myself saying sentences I had avoided. I'm angry, and I missed my brother, and I don't want to be punished for staying. October brought shorter days and fewer swimmers at dawn. I started hosting a weekly dinner Wednesday, 6 o'clock. I cooked too much. They brought an extra Tupperware and never returned it because it became part of our ecosystem containers rotating between households as if assigned tasks. Conversation found steady paths around small hazards. Mallerie helped dry dishes in my kitchen without directing where they went. Ethan took out the trash. Lily did homework at the table while Noah played a game with spoons and invented rules he explained only after he won. In the 8th session, Mallerie apologized in a hallway rather than the office. No audience, no witness. I punished you for a story I told myself, she said, eyes on the elevator numbers. I made him choose for sport and then called it love. I'm sorry. I believed her not because of the words, but because she didn't ask me to take care of them afterward. By November, Ethan had a job offer from a firm that serviced mid-sized tech clients. He texted me a photo of the offer letter like a kid holding a fish. Benefits, he wrote. Real ones. I sent back a thumbs up, then another message. Proud of you. He replied with a single period. Then a minute later, me too. Thanksgiving took up space. The table stretched with leaves. I'd never used the linen stubborn from a cupboard winter. Raphael and his wife came, and Ela and Tony with a pie he swore he'd baked, but whose box he forgot to hide. My mother flew in and brought a tin of butter cookies that had once held her sewing kit. Mallerie arrived with sweet potatoes under toasted marshmallow, a dish I didn't know she knew how to make. Ethan carried the turkey like a dare. Lily set name cards written in her neat print. Noah staged the salt and pepper shakers as astronauts. After dinner, dishes climbed and steam stitched the room into a single temperature. My mother told a story about a snowstorm when Ethan and I were small, and the power went out and we read by flashlight under blankets. Mallerie listened as if looking in at a lit window from the street. Later, when the table was cloth again and the candles were stubs, Ethan asked if I wanted to walk. We went along the path above the water where the night collects. The ocean worked at the cliff in long, even breaths. The air smelled like eucalyptus and something metallic. We didn't speak for a while. The silence wasn't fragile. I kept the books you sent, he said, finally, even when we packed the house. I told her we couldn't give them away, and I knew the her was not an accusation, just a coordinate. I'm glad the kids had them, I said. I missed 12 years, he said, not as a plea, not as a bid. There isn't a word for the shape of that. No, I said. We stopped at the bend where the lights of the coastline made their scatter. A gull cried once late. He put his hands in his pockets the way our father had. Are we okay? He asked, and the question lived in the space between apology and hope. We're here, I said. We'll keep showing up. We walked back the house, a warm geometry on the hill. Inside, Lily and Noah were on the rug making a map of the living room out of coasters and string. Mallerie stood at the sink sleeves pushed up, rinsing the last glass without looking like she wanted a medal for it. Tony boxed leftovers with professional efficiency. Raphael argued gently with Ela about whose turn it was to host next. The evening folded itself without ceremony. Coats found shoulders, pies found lids. My mother kissed my cheek and put the cookie tin on the counter for you to keep this time. At the door, Mallerie held my gaze and didn't flinch. See you Wednesday, she said. No syrup, no frost. A sentence made of plain wood. When the house was empty, I stacked plates and wiped the table in broad circles. I stood for a minute longer than necessary, palms flat on the cool surface, and let the quiet settle. Outside, the gate clicked once as the sensor reset. Upstairs, the window caught a pocket of reflected light and let it go. I turned off the lamps one by one, and the rooms became shapes. In the dark, the ocean kept its measure. The house held steady. The night had weight and the kind of ease that comes from dimensions accounted for. I went to bed with salt still faint on my skin, and the sound of water placing itself against rock again and again, a patient rhythm that didn't need to announce itself to be known. Thank you so much for listening to today's story. If this story resonated with you or made you reflect, I'd love to hear your thoughts, so feel free to share them in the comments below. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you won't miss the next story. I'll see you next time as we continue exploring more journeys and lessons together.